490 BC, the Persian army under Darius I swept out of the east and stood poised to conquer the city-state of Athens. Confident, the Persians landed 50,000 battle-tested warriors at the Bay of Marathon, where they were confronted by only 11,000 soldiers of Greece. Who can guess the fears, the agonies of body and soul that tortured the outnumbered Greeks as they advanced on their invading foe? Whatever their fears, they fought and died for their country and their way of life. And when the cries of fighting were stilled that day long ago, they had prevailed. On that ancient battlefield, they built a mound and buried their dead beneath it. The mound was a monument from a grateful people to their brothers who had sacrificed their lives for an ideal they could not see or touch. It reminds us from across time that freedom has always been costly. To preserve it, one must be willing to pay the price. With the same spirit that caused the Greeks to honor their brave warriors centuries ago, monuments to America's fallen have been erected in Europe and around the world. Compared to Marathon, of course, they're quite young, but in design and in the aspiration of the men whose cause they signify, they are timeless. From its inception after World War I, the American Battle Monuments Commission sought to erect memorials, which would not only honor the men who had died for their country, but would be understood and appreciated by those whose hearts had been seared by their deaths. A sense of those ancient Greek ideals surrounds them, and a meaning that comes directly from our own idealistic beginnings as a nation. In the towns and villages of our unborn nation and throughout its vast countryside, this idealism was nurtured and matured. It found expression in the hearts and hands of the people who settled the land. Full grown, it came to be known as the American Revolution. These people recruited an army, the Continental Army, and even though it was always under strength, ill-supported and ill-supplied, it fought on year after year, marking the land with battles in the name of freedom. It set the British on their heels at Boston. Forced to withdraw from New York, the rebels struck back at Trenton and Princeton. They captured an elegant British general and his entire army at Saratoga. But it was not the British who put them to their severest test. Rather, it was the awful winter at Valley Forge which made them search their innermost selves to discover whether the ideals for which they fought were worth such a terrible price. They found that they were, and steeled by adversity, they began to win their struggle at Monmouth and throughout the Southland, Kings Mountain, Cowpens, Guilford Courthouse, Yorktown. 2 years later, for all the world to see, American independence was secured. Though the revolution was fought largely by common men whose names are lost to history, it was a group of exceptional men among them who stepped forward to claim the right to determine their own destiny. They did this knowing full well that they were risking all they possessed, their lives, their families, their fortunes. The world was astounded by the Declaration of Independence and its claims. Perhaps no one represented the spirit and sacrifice of the times more than George Washington, who left his home to fight 8 long years against the British. He was flesh and blood, we sometimes forget. Yet he had the kind of integrity which makes legends, and legends make monuments, and together they keep something alive which guards the land. Some 80 years later, another such man faced a much different prospect. His deeds and eloquence in that crisis earned him a place in Vigilant Stone, where his image speaks of many heartaches. Beginning with the first battle at Manassas, at Shiloh, and later at Antietam, where there were more than 20,000 casualties in a single day, men learned how costly this war would be. The Civil War called forth more virtues than could be fabled, and more remarkable men than could ever live together on the same battlefield. In Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson, the North and the South had three of the most outstanding generals in history, resourceful in defense, brilliant in attack. During the first 2 years of the war, the advantage changed from one side to the other many times. It was not until the North's capture of Vicksburg and its almost simultaneous victory at Gettysburg that a beginning of the end could be seen. Still, the war ground on for another 2 years, till surcease and relief joined hands at Appomattox Courthouse, and the nation was whole again. Grievously injured, the country began to bind its wounds. The next 50 years were filled with unparalleled growth, expansion, and invention. The more that was accomplished, the more America promised even greater things to come. The year is 1917. The first of two immense conflagrations had been unleashed on Europe and threatened to shrivel the heartland of Western civilization. After 3 years, the Western Front was hopelessly paralyzed, barbed, mined, poisoned. On the 4th of July, 1917, the first American combat troops of the American Expeditionary Forces, led by General John J. Pershing, arrive in Paris. And Paris loves it. With wreaths about their necks and bouquets in their hats and rifles, the column looked like a moving flower garden. But flowers would not serve as camouflage in the regions where these men were heading. As the fighting progressed, temporary cemeteries were improvised behind the lines, usually on ground which those who had died there had helped to liberate. The successful entry of American soldiers into battle renewed vigor all along the Allied line. From the first battle at Cantigny to the last great offensive, where over 1 million American troops drove broadly across the area called the Meuse-Argonne, Pershing's unshakable faith in the fighting qualities of his men was repaid in victory. When Pershing returned to America, he found himself a hero. Not since George Washington had a soldier so thoroughly dominated an American war effort. All the glory a nation could bestow was his. He chose rather to dedicate the remainder of his life to preserving the memory of the men who served with him. Under his thoughtful direction, the American Battle Monuments Commission began its work. On land granted free of charge and taxation to the United States forever, permanent cemetery memorials replaced the makeshift graveyards of the battlefields. Fine Carrara marble headstones would mark the final resting place of each man whose body was not brought home at the request of his family. Every man would be accounted for. No one would be forgotten. If a body was not found or could not be identified, tablets of the missing would commemorate him by name. Thoughtful memorials were commissioned, with a chapel included in the design of each cemetery. The most outstanding American architects, landscape architects, and artists would ennoble them. Finished, they were places fully fit to honor a priceless spirit. Places where relatives and visitors might reflect on these men, their achievements, and their sacrifices. "1920. The war war to end all wars was in the past. The United States moved into an era of prosperity. It even had a name. It was called the Jazz Age. But old alliances were shifting. America, thrust into a position of world leadership, took a prominent role in international affairs. The peace of the 20s began eroding in the mid-30s. Inexorably, the clouds of war gathered east and west as evil men surged to positions of power. Soon the battlefields won a quarter century earlier were back in the hands of an enemy America had helped defeat. December 7th, 1941, a different enemy suddenly and violently appeared from the east. With the attack on Pearl Harbor, the crisis was extreme. It was not until 6 months later that the Battle of Midway helped to even the odds and gave hope to the American people. In Europe, strategic bombing was started in an effort to reduce the enemy's capacity to make war. The Allies landed in North Africa to establish a foothold in the Western Mediterranean and approach Europe from a different direction. General Mark W. Clark, who commanded the United States Fifth Army in Italy, recalls the genesis of the Salerno invasion.
The Mediterranean campaign was born in the mind of Mr. Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And I can see him now with his persuasive eloquence before the map, pointing out the way we should slit the soft belly of the Mediterranean, as he referred to it. And I assure you, when we got down here and it became my job to do some of that slitting, we found it to be a pretty tough old gut. Our real mission was to draw into Italy many German divisions, and in the process of the fight northward, to chew them up, destroy them, make impossible their intervention in the main show which Ike was to have across into Normandy.
Finally, on the 4th of June, 1944, the Fifth Army entered Rome. During the fighting, General Clark had countered German propaganda about American intentions in Italy by announcing that all he asked of Italy was enough of her soil to bury his army's gallant dead. Now, as chairman of the American Battle Monuments Commission, he is dedicated to honoring the achievements and sacrifices in battle of all American forces since their entry into World War I.
The American Battle Monuments Commission, of which I'm proud to be chairman, was created by an act of Congress right after World War I, and General Pershing was named its first chairman. After he passed away, General Marshall was named chairman, and after he died, General Devers. And now I have the privilege of being its chairman. Its responsibility is primarily to commemorate the memories of the men who made the supreme sacrifice, to build originally these shrines in which they rest, and to maintain them in this superb condition that you find this and all others. In Italy, we actually decorated 55 men with the Medal of Honor. I think there were about 250 given out in World War II, so it shows the intensity of the fighting. It is the hope of the commissioners that through our acts we may properly maintain the memory of these men and focus the attention of the people back home of the great price they paid in order that we can enjoy the blessings and the freedoms which we hold so dear and which these men fought so hard to preserve.
And Americans fought too on the wide, warm waters of the Pacific, pushing slowly, doggedly from one steaming, treacherous jungle island to another. Faraway places almost unknown 3 years before became household words. Guadalcanal, the Solomons, New Guinea, as General MacArthur, fulfilling his pledge to return, advanced to retake the Philippines. In the Central Pacific, Admiral Nimitz and his forces fought in fierce, bloody battles to connect dots on the map. The Gilbert Islands, the Marshalls, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. General MacArthur returns to the Philippines, and the Battle of Leyte Gulf, one of the greatest naval engagements of all time, is won. the liberation of the Philippines continues. In early 1945, Marines capture the heavily fortified island of Iwo Jima, and Okinawa is taken. U.S. forces in the Pacific prepare for an all-out assault on the Japanese home islands. A year before, on the other side of the globe, the greatest invasion the world had ever known, or man had ever dared to launch, moved toward the beaches of Normandy. The landings, ordered by General Eisenhower on June 6, 1944, clearly signaled that the war in Europe was approaching a climax. It was the kind of daring of which Americans could be forever proud. With freedom in danger, the spirit of American youth came rising from the waves.
Très bien, c'est exactement ce que je voulais. Mes compliments.
As far as I am concerned, I wouldn't even hope that it would ever happen, because the German radio used to tell us that the Mur de l'Atlantique was absolutely safe for them. Oh, of course, everybody, if you had seen the American troops coming into Paris, it was really, people were crazy. Everybody would kiss the American soldier. Everybody wanted to invite American soldiers in their homes. Everybody wanted to see them, to touch them. It was really something. I remember it very well.
The American cemetery at Suresnes holds men from both world wars, a new generation carrying on the promise of the last. On this point of honor, fathers and sons were agreed. With the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945, airstrikes against the Japanese home islands intensify. The war years culminate in two unforgettable flashes of light as the atomic bomb is dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
An era was over. Our veterans were coming home, each with his own personal memories of what it was like to see a world at war. This is the National Cemetery in Honolulu, Hawaii. The man is Brigadier General Eddie Yoshimatsu of the Hawaii National Guard. In World War II, he fought in the 100th Infantry Battalion and the 442nd Infantry Regiment, units composed almost entirely of Japanese Americans, world famous for their bravery. Nearly half the men from the 100th died in the service of our country. Because this memorial especially honors men who died in the Pacific and in Korea, one might also remember here the responsibilities the United States assumed as a leader of the free world. Responsibilities which carried us into the agonizing conflicts of Korea and Vietnam.
I go to burial services for men of the 100th, other veteran friends, and men of my brigade in Vietnam. I thought one of regret and yet recognition that they have done their share for our country.
Not far from Bataan and Corregidor, this cemetery near Manila is the largest of the overseas cemeteries. Here are honored men who fell in the Pacific and the China-Burma-India theater of World War II. The walls of the missing, with some 36,000 names, reflect the nature of the war. Buried here are the bodies of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines from all the vast reaches of the Western Pacific. words of Richard M. Nixon, 37th President of the United States, recognize not only the debt, but the responsibility of all Americans to these men.
At a time when America is working to build a structure for lasting peace in the world, all of us can draw inspiration from the example of those who have given their lives for this same goal. Viewing these memorials to the fallen, we are reminded of the countless thousands who died so that future generations of Americans might live in peace and freedom. With such a heritage, we cannot ignore, we cannot fail to grasp the torch they have handed to all of us.
Each American Battle Monument cemetery has its own story of devotion to tell, especially on Memorial Day. Here in the Netherlands, a time-honored ceremony unfolds. The people come to the cemetery from all over their country year after year. With them, they bring a parade of flowers for this remarkable day of remembrance. It is a day of thanksgiving, reaffirmation, and dedication.
Flank ammunition. Load. Ready. Aim. Fire. Ready. Go. Aim. Fire. Ready. Go. Aim. Fire.
While fallen Americans are especially remembered in Holland on Memorial Day, their sacrifices and achievements are part of the continuing daily education of children all over Europe. Young people from surrounding schools are often brought to our cemeteries. Here in the American cemetery at Margraten in the Netherlands, they learn about the Battle of the Bulge and the concluding hours of the war in Europe. On the huge memorial maps near the graves of some of the men whose actions made those arrows move, they're given a lesson in relevance, as well as modern history. Some of the places named are nearby. A village where they go to summer camp. A place on the river where an uncle has a farm. They're perhaps too young to know or even guess the agony of war. But in this atmosphere, there is a lesson in courage and friendship among nations that must be part of whatever the day has taught them.
People in our workaday world have many things to do, and their minds are full of their daily chores. But when they have a chance to stop and think, they do want to express their appreciation for those acts of valor.
John Harbison, consulting architect to the American Battle Monuments Commission and chief architect of the Normandy Cemetery, has spent a lifetime giving expression to national gratitude. He speaks here of the purpose of sculpture in our overseas cemeteries.
When the relatives of the dead first come to a cemetery to see the grave of their particular loved one, an old wound that by that time, say 3 or 4 years after his death, has almost healed up is suddenly wrenched apart. The sculpture is to take their minds off of their own particular tragedy and to make them realize that honor is being paid to the men who died for their country.
Sculpture and other memorial features are only part of the setting. The deep red of the roses here contrasts perfectly with the beautiful background of green grass, white headstones, and the green of the trees. Sacred and serene places, well planned, well built, and well kept, by men dedicated to keeping faith with the fallen. Something splendid began and blossomed in the Greek mind, which outlives the ruins of its history. Rome added the scales of justice, that laws are best measured in terms of the common good. We are reminded in the fields of France that tyranny, like history, repeats itself. It plows the same anonymous farmer's pastures, levels his farmhouse and church, crosses the same rivers, and burns the same bridges. The bells of the ossuary at Verdun, where rest 100,000 unknown French soldiers from a single battle in World War I, say clearly that war is tragic and inhumane, and not of itself a glorious thing. The American Revolution raised a new standard of freedom and offered it to the world. If one is to understand the American experience, he would do well to study here, among our lost legions overseas. What kind of country were we? What were we seeking? These men have answered with their lives. They were strong and quick to help when the weak were in danger. What kind of people will we become? Surely the priceless liberty sowed in 1776 and nurtured at such a price shall endure. The torch of freedom, it can, it will be passed on.